Hey, I'm Aqua or Aquarius of Fallen Snow. If you don't know me, welcome to this episode of the Shootin Gallery podcast. Welcome back if you've been here before. So, I wanted to do a little intro to this episode because this is a special episode. This is the first guest episode I'm doing, but with multiple guests, right? It's the first round table or group podcast I'm doing. So, I'm very happy. I'm very excited for you guys to see this footage. And I wanted to say And I just want to say, I have it zoomed in on my face because one of the homies left the call before we started recording, and then we switched which voice chat we were in Discord. They joined back mid recording, not realizing that we had started recording. So I have it zoomed in on my face for the reason of, they didn't know that they were being recorded and they had their camera on, so I thought I'll just put it on mine. But yeah, just thought I'd give a little bit more information on why it zoomed in on just my camera, and then in the future, I probably will have everybody's camera showing. But just for this first episode of Group Podcast, I thought I'd give a little bit more context to the video. And I hope you enjoy the topics that we go into. If you do, make sure to check out the previous episodes of the podcast because we've been talking about a lot of these topics in the past few guest episodes and solo episodes. Shout out to the Be Here Now mug. That's awesome. Found that at Home Sense. Nifty little find. But yeah, I don't want to make this intro too long. We'll get right into the video here. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do, make sure you leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss any of the episodes that are coming out next. But yeah, that being said, let's get into the episode. I hope you enjoy. As I always say, I love you. Stay safe. Good luck.
Tip.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dragon rundown. So, like, if you're into etherical beings and the mythology, especially the ties of dragons to like the geography of land and like the slaying of the dragon Tiamat and I think Marduk, but like especially going into the year of the dragon, which was 2024, right? And sort of my initiation, like over that winter solstice into the new year, was like that the green dragon totally made itself appear, and I had experiences with the black dragon, and there's sort of these entities or energetic beings that are associated with the throat chakra in my experience, whereas like black dragon was sort of more of a lunar type aspect, and then the green dragon is like what you can perceive as coming from more Chinese mythologies, and like how I've seen them manifest is like any other deity in the natural lines, and sort of knowing where to look and understanding that they are an aspect of this traveling through space time and the render system of nature and the mountains around you. So, like, if you look into the clouds and you're like, oh, that looks like the never ending story dragon, I forget his name, uh,
Oh,
or or like the green dragon,
Falcor.
uh,
Falcor. That's the name of the never-ending story one.
Falcor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love Falcor. But like different dragons would associate to different elements and different kind of colors that they come from, different energy centers that they associate with the different aspects of the rendering system at those different chakra points or energy centers, right? And so being a kind of a perpetual like entity that's traveling through space time, you would expect like tailing situation where like if you take a step through space time or you look to the side, like you need to drag or have that XY axis of that frame of view. So it's like that energy that would be like needed to simplify all those aspects into like a distilled form to create the environment around you would inhabit the sort of elemental forms of the dragon. And if you think of like, if you are moving forward in time, but also leaving, your past self in a previous frame, right? You're taking next step, and then you're trailing through that sort of this, how dragons would be connected through that space time trailing. And so that's sort of the aspect of the consumption. Like if you aren't, if you disassociate from all things physical, like your body, and like you need, and every frame of experience in every chakra center is like recallable, like then you would need a sort of point or trail, like you need a connecting dot between two nodal points. So that's sort of the association where like people have a dragon grid for the total earth nodal point ley line system. And like that's the benefit of being able to associate different, curvatures or form layouts, or etherical tones almost. It's like then you could associate associate different chakra point systems, just like the Orion's belt, or you know like Mount Shasta being the root chakra, then would associate to more the red dragon, right? um
And it makes me think of like not a pyramid, sorry, uh, a parade. When you would see them, like I think it's Chinese, but where they have the costume where all the guys in a row with the legs, but then maybe one of those focus points would be the head and the movement of it through space time. That's really cool. And I
yeah,
guess,
exactly.
like you were saying with the Tic Tac or the cigar UFO when you were running, I wonder if it is like they appear when you're tapping into that level of consciousness because maybe they have like sensors or um, similar to how animals and insects have like whiskers or antennae. They're looking out for it. But when you do tap into that, they kind of come to you, like people talk about with the divine feminine, woman in the white dress. If you're open to receiving the messages in the right state of mind, present yourself, right?
Yeah, I take a very more extremist, like synchronistic point of view. Like if two observers are meant to like be in contact, especially at like a higher density. So if you are inhabiting that sort of higher vibration, then you would be able to like fall into a higher vibrational you know, syncretism, or synchronicity. And so, especially if there are entities or, other observers operating in their high vibe craft, or whatever it would be, then, you could have that encounter and then like have that psychic node that would connect you, the observer from the ground, to the flying vehicle. And that's sort of like, it ties in with like the radiation that these crafts are known for giving off, or like the spiking radon meters and the radon associations to like plasma orbs and other sort of spiritual encounters. Because it's like radon is always this sort of described as, this bridge of the toroidal field that would cause that sort of, you know I don't know, the toroidal spin, that would produce enough energy to move an observer from A to B via that levitation, or whatever that energy sort of battery or engine that is psychically controlled. There's a lot of leaps that you have to take kind of cognitively when you're talking about this stuff. But in terms of dragons, that seems more of like more purely elemental force of nature that would be able to inhabit like distilled acts of nature, per se. If you think of like a river flowing, and then like to hold a whole river in its entirety, then you would need that sort of one creature to be that, that you could put a face to like, other than naming each band, or making it an inanimate object. If you are starting to associate more feminine, divine feminine aspects to a certain thing in nature, like then it would be able to hold an intelligence and be represented in a sort of higher vibrational uh, creation or creature, right? So that's just what I've been able to pick up in my psych experiences. And they're kind of the consumption of the past selves too, right? And also a big part of like this hopping dimensions almost, or like, if you're setting your vibrational state, if vibrational states are within that are, helping you shift realities, then like it could be that the garbage goes to a certain place in space, or like, yeah, there's some sort of consumption aspect of past self to cleanse, essentially, right? It's like a vehicle of cleansing that I've seen some of these dragons uh inhabit. And sort of my experience this past year, where like, if you think of the Ouroboros, right? just just the Ouroboros with more steps, when you actually tap into that caduceus of the masculine and feminine snakes, right? And that's sort of the interweaving interdimensionality, that embodying the two snakes at once, because you have the two, you know.
The caduceus is the single eating itself.
The Ouroboros is
No,
the
that's the
single.
Ouroboros.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, the caduceus being like what you see on like the medical symbol with the two
right.
snakes going up the staff. Yeah.
Mixing up my big word.
No, it's all
The
good.
the medical symbol's a trick. It's only the single blue snake that
That's
wrapping that.
true.
And there's misconceptions that are a deep alchemical sort of oversights, or purposeful oversights, to you know confuse alchemic this alchemy of the rebus, and the knowing that we are transitioning into the re-enlightenment of embodying masculine feminine forms.
And it's the two
And
truths and a lie again, because there's the staff and the
right.
single snake, but the lie is leaving out the other snake and that connection too, right?
Yeah. And it's like it ties into Apollo, and sort of Apollo being the guy with the bow that shoots the arrow that causes the illness. And so like Apollo is also this entity that's seen as hovering above, kind of watching, like a god, right, would, over the air. And I don't know all the interconnections, but there's, that's why Apollo in America, and the Statue of Liberty sort of situation, or like the obsession with the A in Freemasonry, or like,
The NASA.
there's so with NASA being the snake, and NASA is associated to a snake deity as well. And
Really?
and also we were talking about the NASA's tabletop RPG. Um, yeah, the Lost Tales of the Universe or something like that. Um,
Yep.
and their main symbol on the TTRPG is the Ouroboros. So the single snake that is continuously eating itself, and that's just because we lock ourselves into the single-minded kind of single snake dimensionality, where like that's your role, is to continuously dissect every piece of everything forever until you find an atom again. It's sort of like uh you cut the story of the zodiac out of the actual observation of the stars, which the observation of the stars would be connected to this divine feminine aspect of alchemy, of the creative mind, of storytelling, Shakespeare, you know. And
Eh,
yeah, so like I have,
That
plenty of things I love about NASA, but that's sort of their trajectory. Their cultural trajectory is to just keep consuming itself forever.
and
Sorry,
that
Danny, go
kind
ahead.
of ties into the recent launch back last year during the eclipse when they launched APEP, which that being the Egyptian deity that embodies darkness and disorder, that's like the arch enemy of Ra, and being a snake. Yeah, and they just happened to launch that during the eclipse last year.
Right.
Well, and
Like,
even or what Proxy was talking about with flat Earth and globe Earth, and something he kept saying is like, "Oh, it's all Appalachian sun worship,"
mhm.
and that kind of stuck in my head, and I was thinking like, well, okay, if that's the line of thinking, but if there's like, if there is science or math to back it up, then it's more than just worshiping a deity, right? But I wonder if it does boil down to essentially that,
Yeah,
and
I think with Apollo, if you think of Apollo being the sun, and like we are all on a vessel that is circling the sun, that's sort of like where you are etherically grounding, and then how that could possibly literally like alter the physics of your reality, or the manifestations of the collective, in terms of just perceiving the sun as the center point, without attaching any mythology or extra steps, and obviously there's truths behind the sciences, and the different aspects of rocket technology. It all comes down to like the actual capacities of going into space via this sort of, you know, single-minded, or, single snake belief culture factor that, we especially when we haven't, there's definitely people that are connecting with both snakes. We're tapping into Thoth and Enki. We're getting into the divine feminine, Isis, and like we're actually building real relationships creatively and visually with these these higher dimensional aspects of ourselves. So it's like, you know, sort of like black hole, right? Like endless abyss versus endless like story creation, or like, and you can build stories around the, development of science. And that's definitely what, we, through Einstein and the development of the nuclear bomb and all the math that would have to go into that. Like, it's all like the single snake, though, right? You're kind of like I'm going to do this without any consideration of like my own astrological ties and the mythologies and sort of like the Tinkerbell rules therein that are required for that etherical connection to zodiacal stories. And so, like, you look in the Bible and it talks about, uh, yeah, uh, I forget they in the Bible the zodiac's referred to as the Mazzaroth. So it is like I forget the scripture though, but it's referred to in the Bible to like consider your Mazzaroth. Consider the Mazzaroth in certain prayers and visualizations because it is like part of the creation of the formation of how the dragons, move and how these etherical like ley lines are connecting each nodal point.
That connects perfectly to what Danny was talking about with Immaculate Constellation and it being about the zodiacs, and then they changed it to. Uh, actually, Danny, can you
Well,
repeat?
it was originally Majestic 12. Majestic 12 was the name of the program. But again, the 12 in the Majestic 12 being a reference to the 12 signs of the zodiac. And so they go, once that name starts getting out into the public, they have to be like, oh, that was a disinformation thing. That was a hoax. Don't worry about it. Don't look over here. And then they rebrand it as Zodiac. And then Zodiac being tied to things like Project Aquarius and Immaculate Constellation, with Immaculate Constellation being the crash retrieval program that just came out that the House Oversight Committee was talking about, and that being a reference to the sign of Virgo. I've heard, I can't say for sure, but I've heard that Project Sign may also be a sub-project of Project Zodiac, which again, signs of the zodiac. They keep talking about the zodiac because again, it's talking about space because all this shit's coming from space.
And
Yeah,
that
it's impossible to avoid because you like still like the factorization of the 12 being the 12 zodiac into the 12 tribes of Judah into the different bloodlines even of the creation stories that trickle down into what we are experiencing now, a different melting pot of sorts. So there's always, you know, it always leads back to 12, I grew up going to a cabin in Lake Superior, and they call it the Apostle Islands because there's 12 islands that are located along, in Lake Superior, and they're like beautiful, the most beautiful place on earth in the summer, and then it freezes over and sort of, it's cold there in the winter. But Bayfield, Minnesota, yeah, it's a beautiful place.
Yeah, and going back to the 12 again, and that's something that I've been dealing with a lot in the um, grand unified theory frameworks that I've been working on, is that base 12 mathematics is a big part of my framework that I'm working on. And that ties back into the fact that, the ancient Sumerians, like the first known civilization that we're aware of, what did they use? They used base 12 and base 60 mathematics. And with 60 being divisible by 12 by a factor of, or when multiplied by 5. And that kind of gets into like the circle of fifths musical theory stuff that ties into my grand unified theory. But base 12 is a lot more harmonious. Because there are more divisors in 12 than there are in 10, and so it leads to a much more harmonious system, and it's a lot better for things that require harmony, like architecture. Like if you're trying to create like an arch, like it's a lot easier to be able to do that. It's a lot easier to break a circle up into 12 parts, which is why we have 12 hours in the day. Like, and like everything tying back into like base 12. And so yeah, it's just it is a lot more harmonious of a system, and we probably would be doing a lot better right now if we weren't using the decimal system.
Hmm.
No, they didn't have decimals.
Because decimal being like base 10, which is what we use now. Um,
I didn't
so
know.
Right.
yeah. Yeah, so it's like base 10 being what we use now, with the idea being, oh, well, we have 10 fingers. But it's also like, well, the Sumerians, they would just count based on the digits of their fingers. And
Yeah.
that ties into the base 12. And then that like and then in addition, like I said before, they're also using base 60 because cuneiform is based on base 60, but that was also their writing language.
That's interesting. Wow.
A- And what's really funny is that like that ties into like a sci-fi book called like Snow Crash, that was like heavily influencing like the Matrix, where Snow Crash uses cuneiform as like one of its main ways for like hacking the system. Like they bring back the Sumerian writing system, and it's just like imagine being the ancient Sumerians being able to track astrological movements with way more precision than we can because they're using base 60 and base 12 when we're stuck here with base 10. And like they're just so much more precise because of their ability to use base 60. And we would struggle to do that with computers these days. I
Yeah.
mean, just think about it. Like think about like how the average person would even be able to like conceptualize base 60. Because it's like you're talking about like rather than like 10 digits for like a specific like like if you want to think of it almost like an octave, like you'd go through 0 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9, then go up to 10, and that start like the next thing. You're talking about going through 60 individual digits before wrapping around to the next one, versus like binary, which is only two, where it's 0 and 1.
Oh, holy shit! So each is its own thing, eh?
Right. It's like when you look at hexadecimal, that's why hexadecimal with being base 16, like you start getting into like not only using 0 through 9, but you're also throwing in like letters of the alphabet like A, B, C, D, etc. And that's how hexadecimal works in computer sciences. But that's only base 16. Cuneiform again is base 60. So they had 60 individual like representations just in one form before wrapping around to the next one.
So yeah, I guess in a sense, because I'm trying to compare it to our system that we have now, because we have numbers that count up that high. So we like, sorry, I'm trying to conceptualize it into like, well, we could just teach people like, oh, okay, count with your digits instead of your finger, and multiplication table, put them to 12 instead of to 10, and then you can work in the 60s and the 120s. And like you were saying, it's easier to divide a circle. Like we could look at a clock,
Right.
orders, or do it like a pie or a pizza. I think it makes sense, but then yeah, when you're talking about computer code, computer language, then it's a whole other thing because computers are smart, but they're kind of stupid too.
Yeah, I mean, hexadecimal is more just an easier way for like humans to be able to quickly write out binary, because at the end of the day, the computer's just using binary. It's a single like on and off in a bunch of uh, uh, basically a bunch of different like connections. So it's like it's either in an on position or it's in an off position. So that's how you end up with binary. And it's just the hexadecimal is more just like shorthand for being able to write entire like bytes at a time rather than having to do individual binary representations.
Yeah. I want to just say with like base 12 and how that would correspond to zodiacal timings and more of the intuitive nature of that sort of brain gymnastics that goes into like building intuitions off of like zodiacal correspondences and tones and temperances that those signs then inhabit, and even like even the way Phoenician languages were reverse engineered. If you remember that one video that we looked at a few days ago, where it took the forms of the constellations of each zodiac and then corresponds it to the Phoenician letters, and then Phoenicians inspired the next language and the Arabics and the English and the Hebrew, sort of that down chain sort of modulation of sorts through space time. There's reasons why these symbols are intuitive in nature, and it's sort of like, I'm still trying to figure out and reverse engineer how that interacts at a more fundamental level with my brain when I'm like in meditation or like visualizing, like building harmonization between the visualizations of a symbol and then the phonetic like repercussions of it. And I think that's sort of where Hebrew steps in, and like, or at least the building blocks of Hebrew corresponds with the mother's Torah, which then corresponds with the different aspects of the Sephiroths and the um you know and then all the temperances of the different of the different Sephiroths. Hi, Varian.
Hello.
Um, and then uh, another thing tying it back to base 12 also is like looking at the platonic solids when you're talking about sacred geometry, because you're talking about, you've got the tetrahedron being four-sided being fire, octahedron being eight-sided being air, hexahedron being six-sided being earth, icosahedron being 20-sided and being water. But what's the dodecahedron, the 12-sided one, being ether?
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
the 12-sided one is representative of ether. And what are those platonic solids most well known for being? They are known for being the D&D dice.
True.
Wow.
Which, in a sense, is kind of a representative reality and all the possibilities.
Exactly.
Like, I want to do this. Okay, well, I see if it works out for you.
Right? No, quite literally weaving in sacred geometry and actual like magic principles. Because again, like, like when we're talking about D&D, like what is the similarity between D&D and Sumerian mythology? Oh, maybe the dragon Tiamat. Maybe that's a similarity between D&D and ancient Sumerian too.
Well, and even the name, Dungeons and Dragons
Hmm.
being the like guide to the stars, the manifestation, alignment with, and then the dungeon, the matrix, and your experience going through the struggle of life from it.
Well, if you think of two, then like if you're trying to control the collective's manifestations in a certain grid, or trying to control the collective from tapping back into more of the base 12 thinking or zodiacal pattern recognition, and then you would want to make your own tabletop RPG with your own rules that are base 10 around all these discoveries that were done in base 10, and like perhaps even the collective manifestation, because if the grid would be thought of just dissections of base 10 into simple like city planning aspects, like like then ether flow would be diluted, or the projection wouldn't be as precise. You wouldn't know where to send that energy as a collective, or like collective harmonization. So there's a bit of like, if there was motivations around like incurring fear into the population to build that sort of loose system, or that energetic harvesting, where like I don't understand it. I don't know what in the world is happening, so I'll just trust that information with the professionals that are telling, that are running NASA, and corresponding with all the governmental systems. It's sort of that's sort of the high end magistrate control system right there, where they're like, it's okay, we'll take care of it from here, we understand the zodiacal timings. Why the JP Morgan quote is like, millionaires don't use don't use zodiacal timings, billionaires do.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
It's even just you saying that and comparing it to board games before. It's kind of like the Monopoly compared to Dungeons and Dragons, where in Monopoly you're just going around the board, collecting your 200 every time you pass go. There's your paycheck. Go pay rent, and then you go broke. Whereas D&D, you're creating your story, and you're really forging your path through the universe that you're creating, or your
It's a
game.
co-creation and manifestation.
Right.
Yes.
And if you look at like the Christian history around, calling D&D satanic, or sort of the Christian, like Christians against Dungeons and Dragons, that's a whole thing, brother.
Yep.
And that's because it's like, there's reasons why we don't want people
They just
to.
be calling anything
Yeah,
satanic, to be honest. They're just like, well, we don't get it, so it's Satan.
I love that screenshot. It's like Christians against Final Fantasy, and it's like really
What?
perverted. Yeah, it's like really perverted Photoshop images that it's like, you wouldn't want 100 hands touching your children. This is what happens when your child plays Final Fantasy. And I think it's probably a meme, or a joke, but like there's definitely Christians against Final Fantasy, and
Oh,
like Christians against Pokemon.
yeah,
Yeah.
The Christians against Pokemon um and Harry Potter were both really big things, like back in the 90s. Both of those things were.
Harry Potter makes a little bit more sense, but like, why Pokemon? What the hell?
It's because they didn't like monsters. It was very strange. Yeah.
We don't like monsters, so we hate Pokemon. Like, that doesn't track to me. That's so weird.
Yeah,
I
I don't
think
know.
I have intuitions about how Pokemon is a bit pretty manipulative for a child brain, especially when we're talking about, zodiacal thinking, or, synchronicities in that sense. But like, it's all, we grow up, and we're in the time, the re-enlightenment at the moment. So, we're all figuring this stuff out. But I have some intuitions about kind of how gaming systems, especially old school, pioneers of the game industry, use these sort of mathematics or naming schemes or inverted geometries to mess with the child's brain, or push certain narratives, catch them all, sort of, simple things that we as adults can like overlook, but for a child mind to be sucked into that sort of you know repetition, or your time spending, especially away from having any clue about zodiacal sort of archetypes or mythological tie-ins to the self. It's sort of a kind of a m- like a like a scarecrow. It's empty and hollow compared to like building zodiacal relationships. And I think that ties into like some like development issues, or perhaps I'm talking for myself, because like this is just how I've been able to kind of step out of that mindset, or those ties to Pokemon, or more cartoon stuff. And same with Disney. Like I have some qualms with Disney, of course, and these
I
things are just too intertwined for me to overlook, as like kind of childish as it would be to like, oh, Disney is mind control or whatever, but it's more complicated. Obviously, there's more nuance involved.
I
Um,
would say that at least it's one thing to get into like, I could see that kind of argument being more for like, the more modern, the more uh commercialized, the more like uh corporate version of Pokemon that we have now. Just knowing what I know about
right.
like the start of Pokemon, it is that was more just the result of someone who is incredibly autistic with very autistic thinking, who was really into bug collecting and wanted to share that love with the world, and that's how we ended up with Pokemon. Because
Yeah.
especially in Japan, they have not only do they have bug collecting, but they have a whole subculture that revolves around having the bugs that you collect fight each other. And that is how we get
Oh,
Pokemon. That is how that all started. It was all because the original creator, I'm blanking on his last name. I know that his first name's Satoshi, but he's just very autistic
bug
and was
collecting.
really into bug collecting, and that led to the impetus of Pokemon.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. I didn't even. I love Pokemon. That's sick.
I I've been studying a lot of stuff that Viktor Gorbenikov has been into, and he is totally like a bug collector, and you know he did a lot of research around the formation of beetle wings, and like he has a whole history of developing this levitating craft based off of mathematics of beetle wings. And you know there's all the information's way too like crazy, and like not crazy in terms of like unbelievable, just like synchronistic, like
Right.
if someone was going to make a flying machine that's essentially like a wood box with beetle wings underneath, patterned correctly, and like utilizing um more of the Euler number, the base 12 sort of thinking, the pyramidal etherical engine of the beetle wing. And yeah, there's all sorts of things too with the chitin of yeah, I'm going way off topic, obviously, but chitin being a chimera like element, not element but molecule, chimera being the two snakes, right? The mirrored,
Right.
reverse mirrored molecule that would vibrate in between this sort of mirror state. And that somehow ties into like etherical vibration and scalar oscillations, and it's insane. And I'm like, there's too many vintage guys that are using these divine feminine principles and like empower in like the empowerment of self, because he's essentially the motor, the observer motor of controlling the levitation of the vehicle. And yeah, so I hope to build something that flies. And with all the UFO talk and the connection to dragons and the perceived dragon riders, like we're getting back to that mythology and that belief state within this re-enlightenment that has been hijacked via different modes of entertainment or game culture to be sort of parodied. So we just think of those ideas as purely entertainment rather than like, okay, no, there's actual, like, there's connections through time that are real in terms of breaking physics, or not breaking physics, or enabling physics to be able to, make a flying craft, or, maybe purely just perceptual alterations to, for self-empowerment,
Right.
have a greater vibrational connection with the earth in those fun sense, Aladdin riding on a rug, where Solomon's crew, King Solomon, was the guy that was taking his crew via flying rugs.
Um, I would almost say though for a lot I would say for a lot of the um Japanese games specifically, I do think that there's a lot of it that I don't think that it's really meant to be parody. I think that a lot of it really is supposed to be trying to bring these ideas into the collective consciousness. Because I know, like, for a good example, is that like that for Final Fantasy in particular, like the idea of using crystals as and like crystals being this source of power that surrounds like Final Fantasy, that's in large part because of the belief system of Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of Final Fantasy, and like that's part of the reason why you have certain things uh, like the Mako system in like the Mako reactors in Final Fantasy VII harming the
Right.
planet, because Hironobu Sakaguchi like believes in Gaia and like believes that we're harming the planet, and that's a big part of why he brought that into it. Or like you look at the Mana series, like Sword of Mana, Legend of Mana, Secret of Mana, etc., and they brought back into the collective consciousness like ideas like the alchemical elementals, like nymphs, salamanders, dryads, gnomes, things like that. Like those are the mana spirits in that series, in the same way that the Persona series brought like Jungian psychology and alchemical ideas into the collective consciousness for the modern day.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And like you know, this past year I'm more critical, obviously, of how perhaps the corporate nobody, would take advantage with the sort of two truths and a lie
Right,
dichotomy, right? Yeah.
right, definitely. As
Same
we
with Harry Potter and like Avada Kedavra, like uh
Yeah, no,
but
it definitely once everything just became about the endless pursuit of profit, it's just waters everything down. But uh, I think that especially like a lot of the heart of those series was always about like bringing those concepts back into like mainstream thinking in like a way that was approachable. Get people thinking about things like crystals, get people thinking about things
right.
like the planet having a consciousness, get people thinking about the elementals.
And the so if base 10 With the Power Rangers, the 5 crystals, what would be the true crystal amount? Would it be 12 or would it be the 5? Would it be the fingers of Thanos or? Hmm. But I like Final Fantasy VII's narrative with the resistance against the Mako, industry that is harvesting the lifeblood of uh, the planet, and they're trying to gain control of, the inverted mother. Geneva, I think, is the sort of planetary mother soul or something like that. And yeah. And then very interesting with like Sephiroth, being, Sephiroths, or essentially the use of different crystals and color schemes that are associated with different energy centers.
Right.
I think that whole system is really, you know,
And that's not even getting into just the, obviously the fact that like Sephiroth's name is very similar to Sephiroth from
right,
like Kabbalah.
right.
Um, but yeah, I mean it is another good example of like the kind of Final Fantasy VII kind of uh Hironobu Sakaguchi bringing things back to like Gaia, like the original name for Final Fantasy The Spirits Within, their first animated movie, was not even related to Final Fantasy. It was called Gaia. Gaia was the name of the movie. And it was about the spirit within the earth and of preserving the spirit of the earth. That was the main plot of the movie.
Yeah, I've seen it pop up, but I haven't really got to dive into it too much. But it does seem like a thick game with how they develop the lore and uh, well, and especially how they adapted the series over the years, going from because it used to be 2D or 8-bit, right? And now
Yeah,
it's
it started out on like the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, like way back in the day.
yeah,
Yeah, moving from 8-bit to like 16-bit to 32-bit. Yeah, it's grown up over the years to become the powerhouse that it is. Now, you can argue whether or not it lost a lot of that magic when Hironobu Sakaguchi left to go to I think it's like Mistwalker is the name of his studio. But yeah, the original creator left and it was taken over by one of the one of the lead artists, blanking on his name right now, but he took over as like the new like head of that franchise.
Hmm. Would you say he's been doing an all right job since then, or they've kind of lost the plot with it?
It depends on like how you want to look at it. It's like if you want to look at it as just a game series, then yeah, I think he's done a phenomenal job of making good games. But if you want to look at it from like the perspective of like Hironobu Sakaguchi trying to put like underlying messages within the games to like really get people to try to think about um, their relationship to the earth and like relationship to each other, I don't know that we've really seen anything like that since Hironobu Sakaguchi left.
Well, and hopefully there'll be a generation of people coming up, you know, trying to put that message back into the art and games and everything.
Yeah, I mean, we're already seeing a little bit of that, not necessarily in games, but those same basic concepts that uh, were trying to be put into the Final Fantasy series. I mean, we see that in the modern day with things like Steven Universe. Steven Universe deals with a lot of the very same issues uh, that they were trying to get across in the Final Fantasy series back in the day.
Even stuff like the Midnight Gospel, talking
Mhm.
about Gravity Falls.
So hear me out on this step out of the world. What do you think about like the naming schemes of game companies? Like, I feel like Square Enix is a spell. It's a spell word. Square Enix, because it was
the
Squaresoft.
it was Squaresoft, then Square, then they combined with Enix, which was a completely different company.
Right.
Enix being the company behind things like Star Ocean, and then they had to sell out to, like, Square had to sell to Enix because Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within was so expensive to make and it bombed royally.
That's
So
right.
I think that naming convention just has more to do with just the nature of those two companies combining.
Well,
I'm
even
always, I'm always like, I think Egypt is a total like spell word too. It's this Nix and Egypt and EA, EA Sports, ESPN.
and
So
like for EA,
reversing the AE, right? Or Enki EA.
Right? Yeah, I hadn't even really thought about the ties between EA and EA. Yeah, but you're right. Uh, the original patron god before Enlil being in charge of the Anunnaki.
Right. And then and Lil, Enki, Enoch, Isa, Ea. It's all sort of these phonetic ties to etherical principles that associate to the phonetics of the words and the associations to the zodiacs. And like that's sort of a big cognitive jump to make, but I would argue that it's very ingrained in sort of the attention grabbing nature that E has in particular. And I'm also like the guy who's yelling like, why is E the only letter they skip in the grading system? You
Right?
know. So that's more of my wild take, but I think history will go to show, especially like tapping into ether stuff, that like Egypt is totally a naming convention against etherical principles
oh yeah, especially
from
especially if the pyramids were power generation or anything, anything more than a bunch of bricks in the desert, which is basically what they tell us they are, right?
right. In China just recently like published the plasma bubbles that are being generated from the atmospheric pressure of the pyramids. So like there's science coming out, and especially like with Robert Edward Grant being able to essentially identify the zodiacal texture inside the king's chamber that's associated with the layout of, you know, ancient Kemet in association to the Nile River and Orion's belt. And then that system repeats in Ireland. I forget the specific. The Wales. There's a Wales pyramid that is associated to Rhine's belt, and then like there's series about how New York and other places in the United States, like the layout of etherical gridding that follows the Rhine's belt that is sort of hidden within the history and the cultures, and from actually having the common people being tapped into that system.
Oh, and I always think of Men in Black 3 when they say it's on Orion's belt. And they're talking about the cat. Oh, I guess that's
Right?
spoilers if people haven't seen it, but it's been out for a while.
Yeah, I think that that's fair game. That movie came out in the 90s.
Well, also like associating the universe to a marble, and the marble's a ball that some other alien, larger alien has in its hand, and you are like just a tiny little speck in the universe of this marble, you know.
Right. The microcosm and the macrocosm.
Yeah. I'm like, you are that alien. That's where my self-empowerment comes in, and like the creative nature around, you know, this tie to the creation of life, or how you are, you know, perceiving sort of different factoring interactions that alter or manifest the new, you know, the next step, essentially. Yeah,
Now,
I think that's a
the
good
the
way to
way that
frame
you
it.
the way that you brought up like the whole idea about like Egypt tying into like the letter E and whatnot, that really does make me wonder, like, how did we end up coming to call it that? Because that isn't what they called it. It really was Kemet. Like that's they called it Kemet. So why did we change the name to Egypt? Because yeah, it's like the whole thing with like the Arabs knew that that's not what it was called, which is why we have alchemy, because it was like the teachings, the science of Kemet. But that's where they get it from. It's from the Egyptian mystery schools.
Right. And then you get into the whole Full Metal Alchemist, you know, the whole war against the alchemist, and keeping that class or bloodlines per se in ignorance around the actual ties that they had, you know, to the different aspects of how these things were even built in the first place, you know what I mean? Or
Right.
their, you know, community, you know, the collective utilization, or you know, and then especially if you get into like Aether, where A and E are like, it's a quantum state. So if you look at that AE symbol, with that is the A and the E combined, it's more of a like horizontal or latitudinal versus longitudinal plasmic projection into the toroidal vortex. So AE would be like the Eiffel Tower, where if you would center your vision at the finial of the Eiffel Tower between the two eyes, then you would have an etheric projection into the left, uh, you know, the left peripheral, and then a E projection into the right peripheral. And then that would be like having those two toroidal spins being held within a single observation. And that's where Hebrew comes in, where Aleph and the symbol of the bowl are
Wait, real quick. I just wanted to say, Danny, see how like one of them's different shaped? I've been wanting to show you this. I just haven't yet.
Yeah, I do see what you mean, but I don't know that mine looked like that.
So I'm guessing this one's the bottom teeth. I don't fucking know. That's what I've been doing, but I don't know if that's right. Sorry to cut you off.
yeah,
The bullshit.
good. I don't know what that is.
Their
But
teeth
AE, yeah,
whitening
if you think of
strips.
shiny pearls, pearly whites.
Yeah.
The you know, if you
Yeah,
think of the
tis the goal.
pyramid,
Tis the goal.
think of the pyramid, like the pyramid would be the A, right?
Right.
Being like the foundational pillar that the Masons are obsessed with, the pure, like physical manifestation of a jed pillar, you know, that would be the receptacle antenna of any sort of vibrational state. Like, then you would have the etheric projection, or the momentum, or the, you know, inverse square law of vibration that would be projected from it, and then sort of the plasma pockets that would be associated to those geometries or the densities or the weights and the measures, measure with a and a E.
Right.
Well, and I wonder
Oh,
if there is an aspect of an hourglass shape with something that we can't perceive above, and that's the as above, so below, and that's the plasma is almost like the center point or the focus of it, the compression between you, maybe.
well, that would be the V. EV. Eve. Atom would be the A. Adam would be the 1. Eve would be the projection past that finial center point. V would be up,
That's sweet.
that upward projection. And then even Eve, just like Wonder Woman's logo, you have the upward projection of that. And that's why I'm fascinated with the Weezer logo and the Wonder Woman logo, because it is sort of, if Adam would be associated to like the, AE, aether, right? Then Eve would be that V associated to the projection of E into uh the horizontal projection of your frame of view. Because it's all about observer conditions, observer positioning, because like you only can see what's in front of you, and if you are looking at the Eiffel Tower, all you're seeing is the energy being produced in front of you, right? And that's sort of the tricky season that we're in with Wi-Fi, 5G kind of interferences, where it's these high vibrational interference patterns that are sort of warping or altering that observer position, as much as we want to believe that it's not affecting us or it's very insignificant, like it's still a variable that's being played into the role, or needs to be accounted for in some manner. Like, I don't know exactly what that manner is. I know there's a bit of orgone, just with my orgone device and using it to jujitsu or harness ambient Wi-Fi 5G waves into piezoelectrics. There's a bit of harmonization that you can do on, from mentally from your brain without any tools that can be projected onto the 5G and the Wi-Fi spectrum, and how that's influencing your brain patterning, your brain wave, gamma, theta, beta, delta.
Because I've seen a picture of a 5G tower that they made to look like a palm tree with real ones around it, and the real trees were, pardon me, the real trees were like flopped over. They weren't cracked or anything. They'd like, it looked like they were getting their energy sucked out of them. But I wonder if there is a level of, if you're not actively participating in trying to form the waves or trying to scale them, if that's affecting you, but if you're putting your energy into them to form them properly, if you can like manifest a better outcome from them.
Yeah. Well, like the old fashioned, Jim Sterling and these orgone enthusiasts that have been making tower busters their entire, for the past 30, 40 years since Wilhelm Reich. They've been making just simple resin orgone tower busters, are what they call it, but they're orgone amplifiers, and that will literally influence the harmonization of the 5G and Wi-Fi, where like the things aren't designed to account for orgone or observer conditions. They're just purely there to send a wave from one tower to the next, despite what's in between those two receivers. So there's this way, like shungite or shungite extravaganza is, because it's something that is a negative that attracts those ions and then structures it into, a pyramidal projection. Shungite takes those waves in, and on that observer condition can help structure those waves that into something more cohesive into the toroidal form, something so the aether can actually harmonize off of, that's beneficial for the brain and the eyes and the etherical conductivity in the space. So like even a small resin pyramid will influence a tower, a larger a tower array. And that's a bit of Tinkerbell rules that's in play there. I don't make the aetherical rule book, but faith of a mustard seed sort of situation.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure Danny could pick up on where I go with this, but I feel like that relates to the quantum in a sense where they talk about the observer quality changing a particle to a wave. And I've been seeing with like HARP and stuff like that how they could be sending out waves to affect the weather, which with the 5G and Wi-Fi at that point, the waves could be affecting us. But I wonder if it is a sense of returning to that like toroid, returning our EMF to how it should be, and if we can somehow create a field against these waves that are like trying to influence us. And I wonder if it does have to do with like as much as it has to do with like the orgone and the shungite, like making the resonators to help with it if you can just do it with your own observer quality.
Right. Well, that's why I'm a fan of this, like etherical anchoring and sort of the Apollonic sun worship, where you're anchoring, like you're perceiving yourself on a rolling ball, chaotically spinning through an empty void, and then the only set in stone thing is where the sun would be then. Obviously you can calculate the Gregorian and the days and the cycles and stuff, but like at a pure meditative like position of basing, that's where you are, and that it's sort of, that's the self-empowerment that is very beneficial to beginning to see more of the etheric energies propagate out. And that's why I'm like, globes, or this way that we are teaching children to anchor onto the sun, or you know just perception, belief things that are influencing etheric propagation. And like, as being raised in American culture, and like I haven't been this tapped in my whole life, and I've had to kind of figure it out. Like there's totally a play on the brain when it comes to these sort of practices and aetherical anchoring, like you knowing your position in your frame of view to anchor onto geometry, and then how the zodiac would then spin around and begin to alter, or that etherical flow follows the same sort of patterning. That's
I
why I
think
like the base 12 situation and
I think there's a
base
certain
60.
amount though. There's a certain amount though for me that there's the part of me that wonders like how much are we truly benefiting from anchoring in time? And
Right.
especially like knowing what we know about like quantum physics, being able to be like, well, we know that time isn't really real, not in the way that we think that it's real. Like everything's fluid, the past and the future, all that exists is the now. And how much of our society runs on like time and like doing things on specific time frames, and it's like how much is that damaging, how much is that like counterintuitive for the actual way that uh, that reality works fundamentally, because we're anchoring in something that we know fundamentally doesn't exist. Like yes, we perceive linear time, but that's more akin to coordinates than it is to like an actual tangible fundamental thing, because we also know that the past uh, is able to be manipulated. Like the past can be changed through conscious thought. So it's like, why are we spending so much time? Like, why are we focused so much on time when we know that it is just an abstract concept that we are using?
Right. Yeah, and then like you can mathematically prove that you can alter the past through gravity, or through gravity. Like if it's all happening at the same time, it's sort of like the E equals MC square, or perhaps like another control arm of leadership to be like, we're all on the same clock. Like you better show up to work on time.
Right.
Like, it's just another controlling infinite beings into and obviously there's utility. Obviously there's utility of tracking the stars and the time and when things happen and having a good intuition on that. Intuition of the timings of the body. Uh, but yeah, definitely the connection to the past, or that you are the past and the past can't be changed, or sort of the calcification that these beliefs would lead you to believe is happening, or
Right.
aging, or like the effects on health.
And I wonder if that's why it's so important to anchor in physical things like the sun or maybe your pineal gland and trying to really find those physical points, even though it is, even in that sense, if you think of panpsychism, it's all kind of the same, you know, consciousness just in different forms, right? So, uh, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely true that time is like it's just associated with movement and motion through space, but it's not its own dimension. It's just a part of the dimension, right?
It's yeah, it's built into space-time, because space-time fundamentally, part of the whole thing that we've proved with the 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics is proving quantum entanglement and non-locality. And one of the kind of like implications of that, uh, of like the existence of, just like the truth of non-locality, is the idea that we live in a holographic reality. And if we live in a holographic reality and everything's kind of fundamentally tied together, every single point in space-time is fundamentally tied together, uh, then inherently space-time can be quantized. So everything just becomes coordinates. So we're really, what you're saying when you're talking about time is really more akin to like a variable than it is something like tangible and feasible
Or fundamental.
or fundamental. Exactly. Because we already, like, if you're able to experience nonlinear time, then you can experience retrocausality. And retrocausality just proves that, like, if you can deal with retrocausality, then you know that the past is able to be manipulated in the present.
And
Right.
in that sense, the future too, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Because
Can I
everything's
tell you?
happening simultaneously, and all of it's informing each other.
Can I tell a joke?
Pick up for it.
He goes, so God created space time and said, "This sucks." And then God created time space and said, "This blows." Sorry, it's not that funny.
Oh, that's like a good dad joke.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
At that point, that's why I had to make the. That's why it had to conceptualize these storylines to play out because, you know, that's the only way to make it fun.
Yeah, because
Right.
otherwise it's just you by yourself at like doing nothing. Like, why not fractalize yourself into a bajillion pieces and have a bunch of stories with yourself? It's way more fun,
Right.
Dr. Manhattan and Watchmen. He's just sitting on
right?
the moon or wherever, and he's, oh shit.
On Mars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like I've been thinking about string theory and like, if you are permanently stuck inside the space time and all you can do is modify your pressure systems and then down to the string theory, each string would represent a different form of a pressure system, and then you would infinitely dissect every single pressure system forever and ever, and then you have what we have with string theory, which is like 500 trillion different pressure systems that can form from from like a qubit situation. And that's why like string theorists are at their tail ends of like believing that it's actually like the viable, that we're actually getting closer and closer to the actual fundamental principles, and that's just all a part of the you know the the dissection of the same thing forever and ever, because since we would be infinite like potentials, you would be able to dissect that infinite potential infinitely, and that's sort of like the the end of science, right? Because then you just sort of
You
finding
have to give up.
one more decimal. You're finding one more decimal at the end of a trillion decimal system, and like that's useless in terms of actual practicality.
Right. And
Yeah,
that's
it's
what,
like eventually point 0.9 repeating becomes 1.
Right.
There's no point to point 0.9 repeating before it becomes 1. They're fundamentally the same thing.
right. And even, F6,
It,
I forget, what were we just talking about?
about string
Just
theory and
string
being able
theory.
to go infinitely in on itself.
Yes. Oh, yes. Sorry. And talking about science, how the scientific method realistically is having a theory, and then you do experiments to prove your theory, or to say, oh no, I can't prove it, or I can't prove it right now based on my experiments. But I feel like all these academic fields, they hear all these theories and then they go, oh, okay, well, it makes the most sense now. And then they just hold on to that as truth without looking at other options and going, well, is this really the best we have, or can it be incorporated? Or, you know, when you compare it to philosophy, it basically becomes useless because it's the infinite division of the whole. And then you can just go, well, do we need to be dividing it, or can we put that time and energy into other stuff? And that's what
Right.
I feel like philosophy is one of the best, academic fields you can go into, because it is looking at the basics of life, of why we're here, what our function, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
but
it's
at the
also
same
like
time, it's part of the reason why they don't really teach philosophy uh, in schools anymore, because ever since the Rockefellers got involved in the public school system, they're not really interested in creating a society of thinkers. They're interested in creating a society of workers. And philosophy at its core is it's metacognition. It's thinking about thinking. It's thinking about knowledge. It's thinking about like what is being taught to you. And that's the exact thing that they don't want people doing. And it's part of why philosophy's been so devalued when it was such a integral part of like ancient cultures.
yeah. And like you can, if we're talking about like just being purely subscribed to gas engines, right? And then like perpetually forever we're stuck in making gas engines more efficient or not efficient, and we're just kind of boiling the resources up forever and ever until we run out of the resource to continue to make that thing work. It's sort of like another black hole of, of transportation that is associated to the Rockefellers and oil barons and the taking advantage of the mother, the mother Earth sort of connection, the red snake.
Yeah, it because the level to which they have manipulated society into revolving heavily around petrochemicals is insane. Like it's part of the reason that the Rockefellers got involved in like allopathic medicine, because their whole thing was about, yeah, we'll fund hospitals on the sole, like, or not hospitals, but we'll fund like medical research as long as it's using the pharmaceutical industry. And lo and behold, what's the pharmaceutical industry revolve around? All of the medications that we use, it revolve around petrochemicals, just like plastics. Plastics are petrochemicals. Like, so much of our economy revolves around petrochemicals, and so they're making their money off of everything. They're making their money off of every step of the entire economy. And so, yeah, of course they're going to be super invested in making sure that like things like homeopathic medications can't be used, because those don't use petrochemicals. They're not going to look at things that are far more sustainable, because at the end of the day, they make their money from petrochemicals, and the American government is also super invested in making sure that, because a lot of our, like, the entire dollar is backed off of the petrodollar. And so if we move away from petrochemicals, then the dollar collapses.
They don't want to put the time and energy into building a system that would actually work, because that takes up too much of their money that they're hoarding in there.
Yeah, because that doesn't make them money. When they could just keep doing the same thing over and over again, engorging themselves on profits the entire way.
And that's why I had to make the video asking, like, are the people in power just psychotic? Because it gets to a point where, how do you keep doing the shit they're doing? How do they keep living their lives going, oh yeah, this is the thing that I want to do with my time and my life, not questioning it or not thinking anything? It just doesn't compute. It doesn't make sense to me.
The YOLO mindset, the refusal to acknowledge that, yes, you are, in fact, in an infinite source of energy and manifestation power, and like
The
the people
fear
that
of
don't
missing
believe
out.
it, right? The fear of
The fear of
missing out.
missing out on every evil thing that they could possibly do. They're like, I need to do all the evil things. What the fuck? I did one thing, and now I'm gonna have the FOMO of evil things.
Yes,
Excuse
so.
my list with my freaking teeth whitening shit on, but yeah. That's what,
No, unless of course, unless of course they had invested interest in the planet warming up.
Oh, the Izzos.
Interesting. Yeah.
And they like it warm.
Yeah, maybe they have invested interest in making sure that that the planet warms up and they make money every step of the way.
Oh, and yeah, even hearing Elon talk about going and colonizing Mars, the first thought I had was, okay, well, that'll be for the richest people. 0.01%, they're gonna go start a new thing. They're gonna leave us this shit, and it's gonna turn into Wall-E. We're gonna have to build robots to scoop up the trash.
they're just going back home if they colonize Mars. They're like,
Yeah,
we just
they
want
are.
to go back home.
Who was on Mars before again? Was that Pleiadians?
The lizards.
They There's remote viewing
So like we didn't go
sessions that
home.
were published
When
by
we go there.
the CIA, remote viewing Mars. I think it was roughly 1 million years ago, and looking at like the society before it collapsed. I've heard a bunch of different takes on what caused the collapse. I've heard some things saying that it was nuclear warfare. I've also heard certain things that it was a natural disaster that stripped the atmosphere from the planet. I'm not sure, one or the other, but what we know is that they're not there anymore.
Yeah. And like the stripping of the atmosphere would be, if we're taking an alchemical lens, would be associated to the firmament being connected to the divine feminine again, like the divine feminine left, or, they took advantage of her so much that we moved, this sort of like they left the example, right? The sort of the imprint of like where that sort of thinking would make and make us end up in. There we go, words.
Yeah. And I wonder if that's what the mudslides were, was in a sense the pushing it to the limits, and Mother Earth getting to, oh, off. You're starting to piss me off. Doing that, try to reset, take out the virus or the sickness, in a sense. Try to come back healthier, and now we're getting to the same point again. I wonder if we'll get to no atmosphere or a complete apocalypse scenario.
I don't think we're in that timeline at the moment. I mean, just due to the fact we're having this conversation, you know what I mean?
True.
And I think that's sort of the self empowerment that people need to, start to plant those seeds of belief and faith of like, we change how we are meditating and connecting to the forces, and then that, just like if you read the creation of the philosopher's stone, where like things grow much faster outside of the confines of space time, or your beliefs of how things should grow or rebuild or manifest or fly, right? Just like the bee.
I posted something on socials talking about how the difference between playing God and being God is that, like, the people playing God are the ones saying, like, oh, I need it to be this way. I want to make it rain, so I'm going to go seed the clouds and force the rain on my crops. Whereas the people being God are going to realize the system is good how it is. The rain will come when it's ready, and you can collect the water, but you don't have to say, oh, it has to be something other than what it is.
Yeah. Oh, and there's this whole thing of like the rain dancers and Kokopelli and the position that the pharaoh played in terms of having the connection, the key or that bloodline to flood the Nile, or like the know-how, the alchemical know-how of what is required, or you know, maybe even just the relationship with the feminine forces that, you know, encourages the vortexes and, you know, creates that foundation for the divine feminine to inhabit the array, right? And that's sort of how I see the king's chamber and the position of Tutankhamun and Esau and sort of the different reincarnations being like that etherical channel that was an important role to the Kemets, and that same with the Irish bloodlines, or like even the connection the natives had, or Kokopelli being a you know a Latino figure, so like these
Even
archetypes repeat. especially in the age of Aquarius, where we are now all being able to, inhabit that man with the jar that allows the water to pour out of the jug, and we know how to fill that jug back up. And, we have that, the foundation of, even just the basic, things that we had to learn through the system too, so it's all sort of a part of a blooming, in a sense, out of the Kali Yuga and out of the age of Pisces,
And even that sounds more, building that connection to be able to ask for something, but still not forcing it, right? Like you can do a dance to ask for a gift, and if you have that connection and your standings, you will receive the gift. But if you're not fostering that connection, why would you get the rain, right?
Right. And then if you, are a part of the ISIS breach system, around the power, prestige, climb to the top, pole position system, you know, uh, like centered around the taking advantage of children and the gifts that the mother gives, right? Where we take advantage of all these different aspects of the earth to incur profit, like then, like you're not going to inhabit that vortex very well, right? You're going to be anchoring onto the Apollonic system, right? So, it's a factoring. There's many layers of factorization, but it all comes down to the self and your connection that you and relationship that you can build with the etherical, the spiritual, right? And then the golden rule that lays behind that, where you aren't trying to skew the natural propagation of a certain system, and you're trying to just inhabit in your, nature. And I think that comes down to how simple it is to begin to airbend or cloud bust or whatever the elemental, talent that you are given.
All have powers. We all have like, well, and that's something I was asking Jewel about this morning. Like, in a sense, if we are God, if we are the creator, the one, you know, do we not have, in a sense, same abilities? If not, maybe we're not born with the abilities, or through growing up into the system, we are, formed out of it in a sense. Like we're taught out of it, or whatever. But don't shouldn't we also have the abilities of what created us? And I think, to a sense, that is our ability to think and to communicate and to create with our hands.
Absolutely.
Go
Yeah.
anywhere from.
And that's
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
natural. Right?
I have to
There's
finish
yeah,
brushing my teeth, but I did want to add in my 2 cents. That my mom told me a whole bunch like of times about this dream that she had, where she was with Jesus, and he was teaching her how to basically like airbend. Like he was like teaching her how to like move the pedals and stuff through the air, and stuff like that, and like teaching her how to do that in her dream. So like, yes, you know like we do have the powers of Jesus, God, whatever. You know what I mean? We do have like the powers type shit. It's just all about like learning it and like harnessing that basically.
absolutely.
yeah. I mean, that ties back into the thing that Bjorky you love to talk about, the faith the size of a mustard seed. If you got that,
Exactly.
you can move mountains.
Amen.
Like, explain that quote a little bit.
The whole like it's like a quote that he basically talks about how like Yeshua says, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. So if you truly believe that you have the ability to move mountains, and you truly believe that you can do it with faith the size of a mustard seed, you can do it. Because again,
Yes.
when Yeshua was going around performing miracles, he was always telling people that it wasn't him doing it. They were the ones doing it. They were healing themselves. And he tried to let them know that the whole time.
Right.
Oh,
Because they believe that he can do it. And so them believing that he's able to do it, they're healing themselves. And he's like, no, you did this. You did this with your belief.
yeah. And I guess when I
Yeah.
say, like, yourself, I mean
That's awesome.
the oneness, right? Like,
Yeah.
the I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think even if you think of like a quantum positioning, frame, right? Like if a mustard seed is just even a little bit of a creative, like, creative belief around how something of that
Very.
magnitude of
Mm,
something of how that of how we would, if we proceed from point A to point B, if that would be a mountain moving through any means of technology or observer conditions, then like you would be able to, you know, meditate or visualize, uh, you know, that outcome. And so I think that's really what the mustard seed would be associated to. Like if you had some, just a little bit of fairy dust that you can sprinkle on a situation, then like that belief factor through time without time, overcoming that time aspect, the belief of time, or the limitation of time, then a mountain could move. And it has. And like, you can part the Red Sea.
Hey.
Hi.
I was gonna ask you through what comes back, but yeah.
Oh no,
Are
I
you
um
I feel like
I
my whites are
threw a
indeed
pair of
curly.
pants and I hit my dog
Oh,
and it scared me.
happens.
Nobody was injured.
Oh, that's like Pete. We'll be walking around and she hears like a noise from our foot grazing something and she'll get all spooked. Oh, it's okay. Dude.
And just my washing machine is incredibly small. So I have to inspect my laundry and sometimes things don't get clean. So I was throwing that back over to get rewashed and I spooked the dog. It happened.
nice? Are you still recording, Aqua? Dope.
Oh, you
Dope.
had that on video?
It's okay. I can chop the
You're on
end
Sorry.
off of
tape.
this.
You're
Yeah,
on
you can
tape.
just erase that.